I now would like to hand over to the next chair. It's Professor Ronel Carolison. She's a clinical psychologist at the psychology in the Department of Psychology. I'm repeating myself. I'm so sorry, Ronel. At the Stellenbosch University, she explores feminist social justice pedagogies and critical community psychology perspectives on equity in higher education. It's a mouthful, but Ronel, over to you to guide us in the next session. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. Over to you. Thank you. You are muted. Ronel, you are muted.
Mute myself. There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues. It's a great pleasure to facilitate this session on enhanced engagement. We have, as you know, 4 speakers in the session. I think what I'm going to do is briefly introduce every speaker very briefly, and then leave the floor open to the 4 presentations that follow. So the first speaker will be Prof Rebecca Garland from the Clean Air Journal. She will be presenting on behalf of the editorial team. She focuses she has a background in atmospheric chemistry with a focus on air quality and climate change. And her research focus is on improving the understanding of air quality and atmospheric science in Southern Africa using multiple data streams. Our second, and she's going to talk about strategies to reach more readers. Our second speaker will speak about how to report to your editorial board. And this person will be none other than Prof Mike Lambert from the South African Journal of Sports Medicine. He's an NRF rated B1 scientist, and he's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Sports Medicine and serves on numerous boards. He retired from his academic position in 2021 and is now a senior research scholar at UCT. The third speaker, Prof Philip Mechanic, will be speaking about the importance of standardized referencing. He's an associate professor of computer science, and he's currently at Rhodes University, and he's done numerous sabbaticals at international university, works in computer science education, computer architecture, and a range of other areas. Our fourth speaker, we are having quite an illustrious audience here, speaker panel here. Our fourth speaker will speak on multimedia and enhancing engagement of readership. Prof Klaus from Presenton, who is the editor of the South African Family Practice Journal. He's based in Cape Town, South Africa, and he's the head of the UCT division of family medicine. He focuses in his research on health service strengthening, health systems, as well as health professions education. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our first speaker, Prof Rebecca Garland, to speak about strategies to reach more readers. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Can you see the full screen?
Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you very much for the introduction, Chair, and thank you for inviting us to present on this. As I noted, I'll be presenting on behalf of our whole editorial board. Okay. And just to highlight a few changes to the title, we're still very much in the middle of our journey, so we'll discuss some strategies we've tried, and I'm really interested to also hear from other journals and to learn from their experiences as well. And already through Nosipo's talk, we have lots of great ideas for next year to try. Before I even start, I would like to thank Asif and Kalisa Journal. I'll talk about our journey today a bit, and we wouldn't be where we are without their support. So just a very brief introduction to the Clean Air Journal. We're a journal on atmospheric science and air quality, specifically in Africa. We've been around since 1971, and we are a society journal, the National Association for Clean Air. You'll hear me say NARCA quite often. You can see NACA there, in the bottom corner. So just a quick look of where we started. These are 3 screenshots of articles from 1971 and 1972. This was a newsletter format more from part of the NARCA, for the NARCA community to share information on South Africa's air quality community. The Johannesburg Urban Heat Island in the middle, and also the one on the Stockholm Conference up in the corner. Those both were actually transcripts of presentations at the NARCA conference. So we've always had quite a strong link to NARCA, the NARCA community, and the conference. NARCA as an association includes academia, it includes consultants, it includes industry, and it includes government. So and NGOs. So it's always been a bit of a broad community, but it's very much focused only on South Africa. So the Clean Air Journal continued. You can go on our website and see all through the years quite a lot of newsletters and articles coming through. And we've had a lot of support from the South African community under NARCA, but into the 2000s, really the submissions were decreasing, and it was mostly just linkages to the NARCA conference and publishing the best papers. We applied to DHET at that point. This was before I was on the editorial board, and it wasn't successful. And so we took a hard look and said, we really think we need a big change because we would like to be an academic peer-reviewed journal. And just that happened in 2023 is when the overhaul started. And I'm just showing here, you can see this was our issue in 2012 before that with only 3 articles. So we did need a big overhaul. So the first, I'm going to speak about a couple different strategies we have tried to attract different audiences. So the first change was focused really on academic readers. That was the first audience we wanted to try to attract more people from. And so for that, and Asif helped us a lot with this and providing advice on how to do this, was to grow the stature and visibility of the Clean Air Journal as an academic journal. So we updated our policies, we had regular issues, we created a website before everything was only in hard copy. We tried to be indexed in as many places as we could be, and slowly apply for DHET accreditation, though of course that did take time. At this stage, one of our greatest worries was to be seen as a predatory journal because we were very small and we didn't have much of a footprint, right? And so people maybe wouldn't know what to make of us. So we really wanted to try to grow our stature within academic readers. We also did start a Twitter account at that stage. I did quite a bit of the tweeting that time on Throwback Thursdays, which was really nice. We went through the archives. As I said, we've been publishing since 1971. And so there's a lot of history of air quality in South Africa. We also would engage with the NARCA conference. We tweet about that. And also we did do an Ask Me Anything with Gauteng Weather on Twitter about the H2S smell a couple of years ago. And that keeps coming back. So maybe we should do another. Also, just to note that we are committed to open access. We made the decision at that point. We are free to publish and free to read. This is only possible with the support of NARCA and also with the advertisers as well. So we're very fortunate for that. So that was one of our aspects, trying to grow the academic readers, but also we expanded our scope in this revamp. We used to be focused only on South African air quality, as it was a newsletter for NARCA, which is a South African organization, but we expanded the scope to include all of African air quality research because they identified a real gap that this type of information, this type of research isn't getting published. So we expanded the scope, but how do we get more readers? And for that, our very first strategy was that if we got more authors, we will also get readers. And so we first expanded our editorial board to include members from across the continent. We would approach authors as well for front material on what they're working on or specific aspects. We had a special front section on pollution in low-income settlements across Africa. We also would highlight research briefs. So this is research that's published elsewhere, but of relevance to Clean Air Journal, and ask them to summarize their work as well to get more visibility within the clean air journal community, and also hopefully to get those authors interested in contributing and reading the Clean Air Journal. NARCA has also been helpful, as they have also linked with other national networks on clean air, such as the Kenyan Air Quality Network. We tried also through social media, I think that has helped. And also we have, right, just the stock slide for editors and boards to use to present and advertise the journal. Unfortunately, long-term quantitative assessment is difficult as we changed websites and platforms, and I haven't figured out how to merge everything. But what I've shown here is very non-rigorous comparison. I just picked two different tables of contents, one from 2015, one from 2022, and I highlighted with a star those contributions that were peer-reviewed that discuss things that weren't just South Africa. So we have been seeing a lot more engagement from across the continent as we've been trying these different strategies, well, across the continent, not just South Africa. We've also had an increase in citations per year, which is seen at the top right. And then also pulling out from Google Analytics what we've seen in this year from users on the left-hand side and new sessions on the right-hand side, which are kind of similar to first-time visits, that we are still dominated by South Africa, but particularly we can see from the new sessions, we are starting to get more engagement from readers across the globe. But really, one of our main focuses is also to get more readers and writers from across Africa. So we seem to be going in the right direction, but we haven't been able to quantify it very well. And I'm going to take one step to the side to explain that, but it's coming right back. Don't worry, it's just one step. So, in the midst of all of this, the editorial board, we started an associate editor mentorship program, and it's an emerging researcher who joins us for a year. And Bianca, whose picture is here, she was our inaugural and founding associate editor. And we did not do this in a way, we thought, more of an HCD opportunity. We didn't think about this, well, it would also help us to be more creative, but it really was. Having this associate editor, she was really the creative and energetic shot in the arm we needed to try new strategies and attract new readers. I don't know about other editors, we at our journal have long lists of wish lists and gaps and how we could strategically grow the journal. But, we're mostly busy with just day-to-day making certain that the journal gets out, that the peer review process goes on. And so we weren't able to always do everything we wanted to. And our associate editor, she was really great at implementing these. So I just wanted to highlight in the little time I have left, some of the things that she's worked on. One of them was an authored video series for the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. It was a video abstract of 5 different articles, just explaining simply what they did. And this we did together with the South African Medical Research Council, and they supported, all of the filming and everything. And we have permanent links and an article about it as well. You can see the links here. So we can always continue to use these to communicate the Clean Air Journal. We've also continued our Twitter presence in different ways, as well, highlighting the editors-in-chief. Bianca led that. And then also every year, we also have a lot of traffic during the NARCA conference, which did go on during lockdown and COVID as well. In 2022, we tried verbal abstracts for World Clean Air Day. We had very positive feedback from the video, so we wanted to try verbal abstracts. And we had already discussed, potentially a different medium, potentially podcasts. But as I said in the note, we were a little scared of going full into a podcast. So we tried verbal abstracts, and you can see one of the links here. It's difficulty in knowing the impact of these. We had a questionnaire for readers on feedback, but nobody completed it. But still, we'd really like to continue trying this. And one of the other drivers for the verbal abstract was increasing accessibility. So just in the last couple seconds, some concluding thoughts, and where we're thinking of going from here is, continuing to focus on academics as one of our core readers and core authors, and expanding to different social media, not just Twitter. We'd like to continue to improve accessibility. We would like to reach a broader audience interested in learning about air quality. Continuing with verbal abstracts, or perhaps NOCIPO contacting you, trying podcasts, trying our hands at that. And we'd like to also improve our analysis of the success, or not success, the failure of our strategies, but just so we have a sense of what we should be doing. And I look very forward to the discussion on what other journals are trying as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. We can immediately move on to Prof. Mike Lambert, and you can perhaps just in the meantime, if you have any questions, post them in the chat box. Thank you.
There we go. Right, is that visible?
Yes, thanks, it is.
There we go. All right, well, thank you so much for the introduction. And before I start, I'd also like to just thank ASAP and the group associated with the CALISA journals, because when the CALISA program started, it coincided with the journal I'm associated with, the South African Journal of Sports Medicine, being a little bit in the dark because our previous publishers had shifted emphasis. So we were looking around and struggling for survival, and that coincided with CALISA journals looking for a few guinea pigs. So the timing was absolutely perfect, and we've benefited enormously from the association, and they've really helped us from being a floundering journal to now getting onto one of the big databases that we've which I think is a journal's goal in the health sciences, and that is PubMed. So in a short period, we managed to raise the standard of the journal to meet the standards required for PubMed. And I think we couldn't have done that without the assistance from ASAF and their staff. So I'm going to be talking about the editorial board. Just when I was reviewing this, I thought, well, let me just see what information is available about editorial boards. And I consulted the document that Suzanne referred to earlier. And really, that if we had just distributed that at the beginning, it would have fulfilled everything that I needed to do in my presentation. So I've extracted from that document, I thought, it's a really good grounding document. It provides the basic information that every journal editor should know about. So I'll report on that, and then I'll just report at the end on the aspects that need to be discussed when the editorial board meets for its annual meeting, or if it meets more regularly than that. So just to remind everyone that the role of the editorial board is really important, and it's the backbone of any successful journal. It adds a little bit of gravitas to the journal if it's got a well-respected, diverse, representative editorial board. So just laying that down right at the onset. And then just with regards to editorial board governance, so every journal must have an editorial board which is reflective of the expertise in the journal. And if it's a multidisciplinary journal, it needs to reflect that aspect as well. And the diversity needs to go beyond just a single institution. So even though, we South African journals, I think it's very good to have international members on our editorial boards if we can do so. The journal needs to list the full names and affiliations of the editorial board members on its website, and this has to be clearly accessible by anyone who wants to find out about the journal. Now, when our journal went through the review process for PubMed, I was surprised at how much emphasis they put on the editorial board, and they really looked at each editorial board member and whether they were active scientists and whether they were active in the areas that they are meant to represent. So it's really important, if you are trying to improve the quality of the journal, to have to take note of what the requirements are. The members should be appointed competitively and for a specific period of time. So what we've done now is we've created an MOU, and on that MOU, we've also indicated the term of office. We didn't do that in the beginning, and as we've evolved, we've realized that that is quite important. Now, the board members need to contribute to and assist the editor-in-chief to achieve the best strategies and policies for the journal. We also went through a phase where the editorial board was a little passive, and as we evolved, we realized that the board needed to get more involved as well. So we had to coerce that relationship, particularly in the early phases when we hadn't defined very clearly what the roles of each board member were. But they do need to feel part of the journal, and they do need to be invited for comment, and the advice needs to be sought. What we've tried to do, we haven't quite got there yet because it takes a couple of cycles to get there, but what we've tried to do is to rotate members so that we've got more experienced members and new members on at the same time. We went through a phase of just having older members on, and then when we started rotating, we were able to keep some of the older members on for a little bit longer and get new blood involved as well. And I think that's really important. And I think we're in a position now where we can do that much more systematically and ensure that the composition that changes reflects the content of the journal. Now, the South African Journal of Sports Medicine is a multidisciplinary journal, so we serve many different disciplines that fall under the umbrella of sports medicine. So it's really important that those different disciplines are represented by an adequately trained person. There is reference in the guidelines about editorial board members publishing in the journal, and there's nothing stopping them publishing in the journal, but their submissions to the journal have to be handled with perhaps extra due diligence. That's, so instead of having 2 reviewers, what I normally do is get, say, 3 reviewers for a paper that's submitted by someone on the editorial board, just so that if there was ever an audit done, there would be no doubt that editorial board members are treated, or papers submitted from them are treated more easily than papers submitted from someone else. And at the start of an editorial board member's term, their duty should be clearly defined. And what I've done now is I've developed a MOU outlining all the responsibilities so that they can see what the expectations are. Then they can sign it, so they realize that it's more than just an honorary position sitting on a board and being able to use it for when they apply for promotion. By getting an MOU signed by them, it makes them realize that there are some expectations and they are required to do a little bit of work as well. So just being a bit more specific about the role of the editorial board. So their job is really to advise and support and just contribute to try and improve the quality of the journal. They're expected to review occasionally. I try and avoid asking editorial board members to review perhaps more than twice a year, because I'd rather they put their energy into some of the other roles. But every now and then a paper that's ideally suited to one of the editorial board members gets submitted, and they'll then be asked to review. Another responsibility which perhaps needs to be articulated clearly is that they expected to encourage colleagues and peers to submit suitable manuscripts to the journal. So they're almost like an advertising arm to the journal. And a lot of them just did that without being asked to. But I think if it's made clear in the MOU, then it sensitizes them that this is actually one of their responsibilities. And then they also expected to make suggestions to the editor about suitable articles, or if there's a very topical point that needs to be addressed, then they can bring that to the editor's attention, and then someone can be invited to write a commentary on that particular topic. So if the communication is done properly, then the editorial board members feel that they're actually part of the management team, and they add a lot of value to the journal. If they're invited to be an editorial board member and then just left passively, then I think they realize that they assume that they have been invited just to add a little bit of quality to the journal without any other expectations. They have to try and promote the journal through their networks, including social media. And as we've discussed, they need to provide a bit of prestige to the journal. It has to be pointed out that any correspondence with the journal and with manuscripts that are in review have to be done confidentially and cannot be circulated. I think most people who at the level of being on the editorial board will understand this, but I think it's probably good practice to just put that in the MOU as well, so that there's no doubt at all that this is what is required of them. And then in the code of best practice that I've extracted this information from, it also refers to the fact that the editor's decision on publications are final. And that I think just, there's a time and a place for hierarchy. Sometimes there should be hierarchy, sometimes there shouldn't. And I think in this case, when a decision has to be made about the acceptability of a paper, once all the information's been gathered, then that final decision is the editor's decision. Now, just lastly, this is my last slide. So the best practice principles are that the editorial board should meet together at least once a year, preferably more than once a year, but at least once a year they should meet and discuss the journal. It makes it a little easier now that we've got more accustomed to having online meetings. It was quite difficult a few years ago when the ease of having an online meeting was different to what it is now. So there are really no excuses for the editorial board to not meet at least once a year. Now, the topics that need to be discussed at such a meeting will be just a review of the bibliometrics covering that reporting area. So, for example, how many papers have been published? How many citations are there from the papers that are published? Just any useful information like that. If the journal has an impact factor, what is the impact factor? Has it changed over a period? So all the basic metrics that dictate the level of the journal should be discussed. That helps to identify whether the journal's going in a positive trend or a negative trend. The reviewing statistics also need to be discussed, and these are quite important. And with the online systems now, it's very easy to extract these statistics. So, for example, the duration of the review, how many papers get submitted, how many get rejected, how many get rejected without going out for review, etc. So all that information can also contribute to the quality of the journal and ensuring that the journal is on the right trajectory. This might be an opportunity to also discuss any future editions. So if there's anyone who wants to maybe coordinate a special edition on a particular topic, this would be the time to discuss it and make any plans that there might be. If there are any suggestions for improving the journal, like incorporating social media or incorporating a YouTube channel for the journal, all those sorts of bells and whistles that might contribute to the journal raising its status or increasing its visibility can also be discussed at the meeting. And then the most important, or not the most important, but an important aspect is the budget as well. And I've found that as our journal has grown, more and more effort needs to be put into the budget to ensure that we can remain an open source journal, without depending on a sponsor, and without ensuring that the authors have to pay exorbitant page charges. So this is an ongoing challenge and something that needs to be discussed, because I found that when you get about 6 people around a table, there are such different opinions, and sometimes you get very good ideas about ways to increase the budget or get income to support the journal. And then this is also an opportunity to discuss the rotation of the board members and just remind those board members whose term is coming to an end. And maybe you can also discuss if there are any suggestions about replacements, just so that it's a seamless changeover of duties. All right, well, thank you. I think that's all I have to offer. So if there are any questions, I'll be very happy to try and answer them when we have the question and answer session later. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. There is just a note in the chat to ask for if you could share the MOU, and we'll come to questions in the next round. So I think what I'd like to do is hand over directly to Professor Philip Mechanic. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let me just get my screen share sorted and then we can go. Didn't take me too long. And right. Now I've got it displayed. I just need to find the right screen. Right, let's see if that gets it. And okay, I just have to set some preferences here because I haven't used this computer before for sharing screens. And
Prof, it's Maputi here.
Yeah, it might be a bit quicker if you display it from your side.
Yeah, I was going to suggest if we can either do it from your side or if we can go on to the next presenter while you are perhaps managing to do that. What do you suggest is the best to do?
Well, I did share my slides earlier, so it shouldn't be too hard to do.
Okay. Thank you, Mputi. There we go. Thanks, Philip.
Okay, good. Right, so my name's Philip Mechanic, and let's go to the next slide. But somebody else needs to drive this because it's not my slideshow. So can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm talking about standards here, and one of my favorite quotes from a computer science author is, the nice thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. Let's go to the next one. So why do we use references? Well, they provide authority, further reading evidence of the contribution of the paper and that the author knows their field. So why do we need standards. So I'm going to give you a few experiences from Ciphering Computer Journal. Next slide, please. So if you are looking at the context of a particular paper, you need to know that the author knows their field, and not only the kind of references, but they are referencing in a style that is standard for that field. And of course, other people reading the paper want to be able to verify that it's based on sound sources and to be able to do further reading, and that implies the references are findable. And from the point of view of the journal, you want consistency, and it's part of a professional layout. Ciphering Computer Journal, when was last reviewed, for instance, had very positive comments on the look of the journal. So what sort of standard do you want? Well, there are many to choose from, as I said before. The American Psychological Association standard APA is now, I think, in the 7th version when I last checked. There's various other common standards, Harvard, Chicago, and so on. And there are also some that are specific to particular academic societies. So our advice as editors to our authors as a starting point is use a reference manager. So another thing that varies between disciplines is whether to have a reference list or bibliography. In computer science, for instance, we typically have a reference list. Some other fields might want a bibliography to show that you're widely read in the field rather than just citing the references used. And also, where it comes to different standards, do you use an author and year model or just a number that points to the reference list? And if you do use authors, do you list them all or do you use et al? And APA is particularly tricky in that respect. Another detail is whether you list in alphabetic order or order first citation, and you typically find disciplines will differ on what the common approach is. Next, please. So why a reference manager? Well, if you're an editor, you would like to set the style correctly in one place rather than to have to go and edit every reference if the author hasn't done it in your style. And you can also pick and choose the level of detail. So some styles, for instance, when citing a journal, will require both the volume and the issue number, some only the volume number. And so you can choose that level of detail. If a reference manager is used, you can fix it in one place. So I mentioned briefly also from the author perspective, because you could consider putting these things in your author guidelines. If you are writing more than one paper in the same subject, you can get the details right in one place and then reuse it. You can also change the style easily and also make sure that the citations match the reference list. As you type these things in manually, not always so easy. So there's a whole lot of these reference managers. I've used Mendeley myself, and JabRef. EndNote is quite popular with Microsoft Word users. I haven't used Zotero, but it seems to be quite popular. And the ideal is that these things are format independent. So you can export the references in the style you need for your particular piece of work. And the reference manager can also store details that may not be necessary in a particular style. I mentioned before the issue of the volume and issue number. And with a journal, there are lots of details you may or may not include, like the page numbers. And other details are whether you use the full details of the authors or just initials, or whether you give the entire list or the first 8 followed by an ellipsis or whatever. But in your reference manager, you store the whole thing. And then when you export as a reference list, those details, or as a citation, those details can be decided. One really important detail is a DOI, Digital Object Identifier. And we insist those are used wherever available. There are 2 reasons for that. The one is if we use a DOI ourselves, then we're required to use DOIs in all our references wherever possible. The other reason is it makes it much easier to find a reference to double check the detail. So what about the writing tool? Well, some journals will prescribe this. We allow submissions in Microsoft Word or LaTeX. Word is very popular, but it's really not designed for scholarly writing. A sort of rough metric, about half of our submissions are in Word and about half in LaTeX, and about 90% of our problems are on fixing the format in Word. So LaTeX is a markup language. It has a longer learning curve, but it has some significant advantages. Style changes are much easier. You can see how you did it. So in Microsoft Word, you always run into the question of, did the author type it like that, or did they use an automated tool to generate it? And the referencing is not the only hard problem here. Things like tables, for instance, in Word, I find if I reformat somebody else's Word document, they can fly apart into small pieces because I don't know how they actually put it together. So we like using Overleaf, which is an online version of LaTeX, which allows collaborative editing, and it's also got a rich text format, so it's a bit easier to see what you're doing. And we use LaTeX for final production because even if something's originally typed in Word, it's a lot easier to do the final formatting in LaTeX, including particularly the referencing. So what is our standard? We use APA version 6, and I should mention here I'm the past editor, so the current editor, Kathleen Milan, is with us, or was when I last checked, and who knows, maybe she's planning to change to APA version 6. So is this any good? Let's see on the next slide. Actually, no, it's pretty atrocious. It's hard to manually check. It's got arcane rules for when to use et al. It's also a very busy style. You write citations as author, comma, year, with or without et al, sometimes with multiple authors, and there are scenarios you have to put in author initials as well. The comma is superfluous, and parentheses occur in normal text. I much prefer myself using a citation style, using square brackets and without the comma, but what can I do? I was only the editor-in-chief. It doesn't play particularly nicely with undated references. It gives the errors n.d. but there's no standard for if there's more than one like that. So if you've got Smith n.d and Smith n.d, which are actually two different references, the citations look the same. So what we do is our solution is for review, we ask authors to submit with a numeric format because there's much less to check. So what does work for us is DOIs. As I said before, they're great aid in verifying reference details. And a reference manager that either stores in BibTeX format or can export in BibTeX format is a huge improvement on a raw Microsoft Word document. So in summary, as an editor, choose a standard and stick to it, and be, on the other hand, prepared to be flexible in allowing a different submission format to the final published one. And if you're giving advice to authors, use tools that are flexible and allow changes. Right, that's all from me.
Thanks so much, Prof Mechanic. We'll go over directly to Prof Klaas van Presenten. Looking forward to this. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Just want to make sure that my slides are presenting fine.
I can see it.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you for the opportunity. I would just like to acknowledge the colleagues from the editorial team and board and our publisher for the South African Family Practice Journal. And as you can see, my talk today focuses on multimedia, although I feel slightly have some slight degree of imposter syndrome after this morning's great talks, and I'm sure that there are colleagues on the call that are probably much more knowledgeable about the various ways of enhancing readership through multimedia. But let me give a go and share what our current thinking is, and I think as Rebecca and others have also shared, there's often the aspirational versus the operational tension, the aspiration of having a greater readership engagement through novel and ways. So what my talk will be about will be looking at the why and the how and the what next, trying to just structure my own thinking when reflecting on how best to engage readership. So I think probably the authors so far have really addressed this issue about the need to engage. I think that the group here would probably feel that there's unnecessary to maybe spend time on this. I mean, the initial talk this morning also talked about the role of Asif in this policy statement that was released a few years ago, really about looking about how we communicate science and almost democratize knowledge, and also look away what are the who owns knowledge and who should know and use knowledge, and how do we work to make sure that access is more freely available, and with less hindrance. So the one of the key things that we look also in terms, which I probably in this whole industry of publish and perish or publish and flourish, hopefully, is around metrics or bibliometrics. And this is a slide from the University of Cape Town Library Service. So looking at reach and visibility and impact of the journal. And from bibliometrics has also been the move towards also incorporating alt metrics or alternative metrics, as it is also known. And as you can see, it's a complementary. So it's not meant to replace bibliometrics, but it can be a way to enhance the bibliometrics of citation indexes, and it's really meant to be complementary. So it's also about are there other ways of packaging or repackaging the knowledge other than a traditional scientific scholarly article format, especially around ways to make it more digestible, in terms of sound bites or policy bites, as some have called. Maybe making sure that it's maybe converted or repackaged into a different platform that's more readily accessible, that will draw the reader back to the original article for further reach. And it's also in this day and age, in terms of attention span, we know that we are flooded by information every day, and if there's a way to make the highlights and the main messages more tangible and clear, it will also help to draw the reader to navigate the stream of information that's coming through. So if we were to look at the how, and I think colleagues so far have already also spoken quite a lot about it. I really enjoyed the talk by Nosipo as well, that looked at podcasts and, as you know, video casts. I mentioned additional platforms, and one of the platforms that is really accessible to us is the Conversation Africa. And then, of course, social media, using it at different platforms. So as you can see, these are several examples of methods of dissemination. One can look at these policy briefs. One can look at conferences, and of course progress reports to funders, but also looking at websites and online blogs. And it's also important to almost, and I'll come to that in a bit, about having a communication strategy in mind about who is the audience of your journal, and who's the current and the desired audience of your journal, especially if we're thinking about policy and influencing the broader conversation and narrative in society. So this then supports that premise. Is about considering your stakeholders and audience member. It goes without saying, I think, with this group, about the need for open science, and also to remix traditional outputs. We've talked about the audio version, but also to think about the visual context, and then finding the right tools as informed by your communication objectives, which I think in our case is something we've been really grappling with over the last year or so. We've so maybe just as a small aside, just to say that with the South African Family Practice Journal, we have appointed a new editorial board earlier this year, and that's why I'm also quite keen to pick up from Mike Lambert and his ideas. But also we've appointed a few additional assistant editors. I think much like Rebecca has also probably discovered the need to because the editorial role is only one fragment of your day, and it's nice to have additional support from especially like-minded but also enthusiastic and energetic colleagues who can diversify the portfolio of the editorial team. So we have essentially 4 assistant editors with 3 portfolios to them, and one of the portfolios is around readership engagement and multimedia. The other 2 are around CPD, which is a core component of our journal, as we are the official journal of the South African Academy of Family Physicians, and our primary journal audience is the primary care clinicians in Southern Africa, providing primary care, so all members of the team, not only doctors. But many of the issues that we deal with is also related to the broader issues within the public and private sector. And then the last portfolio is around capacity development in terms of authorship and research, especially aimed at early career researchers. So I'm working closely with one of our colleagues, the assistant editor, on our multimedia strategy, and we are providing an update tomorrow for our editorial board. But so again, we have a lot of ideas, and we are slowly moving towards implementing it. And then I must also say that we've really have received excellent support from our publisher, AOSIS, and their marketing team, who's also looked at some of the examples that I will share now. So in terms of social media, it's really, in this day and age, no longer an option. I feel this is there's a lot of evidence for the reach. I mean, a lot of people use social media also to inform and be kept up to date with the latest research in their discipline by using maybe hashtags or other, following certain key individuals who are thought leaders in their discipline. And that's often one of the interesting ways of amplifying your output. Is, I mean, there's there's, as you can see, the Hootsuite is one of the ways of organizing your social media output, and that's often done by the publisher or the journal team. But then often what I think is more of an organic way of engaging and growing your output is to have members of either the editors or the editorial board or key influencers share and amplify your output, because I think the audience out there, they are probably more inclined to be interested, especially if there's like someone with a critical voice or clear voice for that discipline, and they would more likely have a bigger reach through these type of platforms other than a traditional push from a Hootsuite or similar platform. So this is quite a useful textbook that's open access, so you can just access it through there. And it talks about a lot of e-marketing strategies that is really useful also to scientific journals. And as you can see, there's a on the figure 9.5 on the right is really about about almost looking at your journal and its output as a certain brand with a certain audience in mind. And also the types of outputs that you can look, and we probably will be aiming for a combination of them. I mean, some of the ways of growing your social media platform is to have a mixture of these outputs that speaks to the emotions, but also to the rational aspects of educating, and especially around inspiring. And I think many people who have been tracking their metrics on their social media platforms are often quite astounded about which posts draw the most attention. You think sometimes it's the carefully crafted one, but sometimes the more informal, light-hearted one has a bigger reach for many reasons. So it's maybe also useful to reflect on your own social media tracking and statistics. So these are what was a few years ago from this social media GP website, the top 4 of social media platforms. But we know things have maybe changed a bit with the Twitter saga, as we know, and I think it was also referenced to earlier by another speaker. But it's really about understanding the focus and role of these different platforms and what are the typical audience that engage with them. I mean, Instagram is not mentioned here as well. There's TikTok and other platforms that also are of value depending on the audience that you wish to reach. I'll have these slides available so if people want to access some of the information and references. So as mentioned, we have employed a few ways for our particular journal, as well as the South African Academy of Family Physicians, to make use of these different platforms. We had, for instance, a policy brief that summarized some research on the impact of family physicians. We are using Twitter, and then we're also increasingly using vlogs or video blogs as ways of communicating some science. For instance, this one was around the open access week of 2022, when 2 of the assistant editors gave a great short clip that also was through the YouTube channel, but then it would also draw back to our journal's website. So in terms of the what next, and I've mentioned before the need for the communication strategy. So it's really something that also needs to be planned carefully and thoughtfully, but also with some blue sky thinking and maybe some creativity to be applied. So it's as I said, it's important to understand the context that you are in, especially if you want to join the conversation on for instance Twitter or other platforms, and I think it's something that one sort of has to immerse yourself and remain involved with on a frequent basis. Much like you need to be familiar with the discourse in your discipline, it's also important to know what are the pressing issues and the matters that draw attention to aspects of your discipline or broader society. I mean, especially maybe from a societal or global health perspective. And then to have an action plan that could be tracked. So for instance, the figure on the top right would be that what they call an always on approach. So that one builds a relationship with the audience, with your platform of choice, or your platforms of choice, which could be plural, especially if you have maybe different platforms that you use for different audiences and different content for those different platforms. And that you might have some campaigns or to activate the engagement, just to and then over time, hopefully the relationships and the followers will grow. The bottom right, you will see the different type of, on the left is the traditional ways of publishing, the cycle of publications. But then towards the right, you will also look at who are your target audiences. And increasingly, we need to also look at the public and policymakers, especially depending on your discipline. And then just finally, this is a way of creating an action plan is to look at your team, at what are your capabilities and capacity, who has strengths and interests and time available, what are the costs and budget. I think someone mentioned the budget before, of looking at using budget. Is it something that someone will volunteer their time on, or are you going to outsource it purposefully? And then to have a commitment to a frequency and volume of activity, as well as having someone to man the platform to respond, especially if there is some engagement and queries around the different platforms. But it's important to have a conversation plan in mind, and to look at the tone and the voice and the accessibility of the content. So this is just in a summary of the why, how, and what next. As I said, it's not meant to be is as comprehensive. There's so much more to it, but hopefully this is a taster of multimedia and readership engagement. Yes, thank you very much for your time, and thank you also for the support from the editorial team and the publisher with our journal.
Thanks very much for those interesting presentations. I wonder if there are any particular questions, and then you can just say to which presenter on the panel you are addressing your question. I'm just looking at the chats to see as well. I think there are a number of comments, affirmations for the fantastic presentations. Right. Yeah, I'm looking at, seems to consist of affirmations, of comments on what people are saying. But I think we have a few hands I'm going to give. I couldn't see in which order they went up. So I'll start with Nasipo, then Kelly, and then Susan Veldsman. Nasipo.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the presenters. I'm really excited that I was able to listen in on this session. I wanted to make particular comments to some of the things that Klaus has raised, because this is also something that I'm deeply interested in. I've been following quite closely what's been happening with all the tech layoffs at the moment. And I think what is often misunderstood is how this is actually implicating how people are accessing information in real time. And because a lot of this is distinctly changing how the algorithms are being designed and what it is being pushed. So the kinds of information that are being targeted at very particular audiences and to what ends. And it is often for the ends of commercial needs more than people actually being able to access what they're interested in or the conversations they want to be part of. And so I think, you know, the stuff that's being done in digital humanities to really think about AI and algorithms and why it is that we as social scientists, well, I'm going to speak as myself as a social scientist, need to start actually having conversations with folks in computer sciences who really understand this technology in a way that I think we often are at a surface engagement with, and that we actually need to be a bit careful sometimes with how we kind of get in bed with some of these tech giants. So that's just really a comment to some of the provocations raised in Klaus's talk, because I think it's an exciting prospect, but also with a lot of critical engagement with what this thing actually is and how it works.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone, I'm first going to take all the questions, and then we can, you know, then the panel can respond. Kelly, you can go. You're muted.
Hi, everyone. Good to see all of you in the room. So my question is a little bit more practical, and it's maybe to everyone who spoke about kind of alternative products, or kind of the short video clips and the summaries of abstracts and other things that you shared on social media to engage your readers more. It would be useful to know how much of that was done by yourselves, how much of that is managed by authors, what kind of guidelines do you give them, so that we're a very small journal with a tiny editorial team. And so, already the impact of production is very great on our team. And so it would be useful to know if you've been able to successfully pass that on to authors at all, and how that's gone.
Thanks, Kelly. Susan, How do you pronounce your name, Susan or Susan?
Yes, I'm afraid it's the Afrikaans version, the Susan one, but you know, anything flies in my vocabulary, doesn't matter. I recognize them all. Yeah. So thank you. So this is really just a comment, and I think I'm really amazed and impressed and actually very excited to see actually for the first time in our conversations at the National Scholarly Editors Forum, a huge science engagement focus coming to the fore. Because I think although we're a scholarly journal, we must understand our role, and the importance is to make science a little bit more sexier to our stakeholder groups. Even if it's a scholarly journal, is how do we address that? How do we entice people to actually engage with the sciences in its entirety? And I think, yeah, I do hear sort of the pledge of editors to say, yeah, but we're already so busy, so now we have to do this as well. But I just think the world of scholarly publishing is evolving, and there is a huge inclination towards engaging with the publics. And the publics, I mean, from the policymaker up to the school child, etc. So it is a huge responsibility, but it's interesting to see how the conversations are evolving to a complete different level. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very valid comment and really important for us to think about how we're going to do it in the most efficient and effective way. But I'd like to ask the panelists to respond particularly to Nasipo and to Kelly's question. Thank you. And you can go in any order if you feel you can add something to their question. Rebecca?
Sure, I can try to explain at least how we did it in response to Kelly's question. To Nasipo's point, it's very relevant. I'm not certain necessarily, you know, what to do with that, and like how do we craft our strategy considering all these issues and biases with social media, and you know, as a very small journal, what to do. So I'll be interested also to hear from others on that. For Kelly's question on the practical aspects, we also are a tiny journal with a very small team. And for the first real foray into, you know, past just Twitter and kind of smaller things with the videos, we were lucky that the Medical Research Council also wanted to celebrate the International Clean Air Day. It's one of the newer UN international days. And so we were able to partner with them, and they covered the production costs of the videos for us. We did give authors very specific instructions. We did also ask to read their script beforehand and to give them some pointers, because we wanted it short and sweet and to the point with that. With the verbal abstracts, Ina helped a lot with that and getting them onto OJS. We just had them read their abstracts, thinking more towards accessibility, so that was a little bit easier. Everything that we've done was quite ad hoc since we're very small, but now watching classes, I want to now draft a communication strategy and hopefully include some of these points in it. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Rebecca. I wonder if anyone else would like to respond, or perhaps my lights just went out, but fortunately my internet is still on. So to the idea of the internet, our algorithms work, and what that means for us as scholarly publishers.
Okay, should I weigh in quickly there?
Please.
So one of the tricky things for people wanting to draw on computer science and other disciplines is understanding each other, number one. And number two is when you are actually publishing work that has to go for review, is to find reviewers who actually understand both angles on it. So, you know, there aren't quick fixes and easy solutions for these things, but we should talk to each other more. You know, I've been involved, for instance, in bioinformatics, which is application of computer science to biology problems. And it is quite hard to get these things right. You know, so That's in terms of the academic content. Where it comes to things like using social media and so on to promote your journal, you just need to try various strategies and see what works. You know, social media can be very noisy. You are competing with things like Trumpism or the war in Ukraine and so on. And there are forms of social media that are a bit more academically aligned, things like ResearchGate, for example, or even LinkedIn. So you need to decide what you're trying to do. If you're trying to sell your discipline to the broader public, then you need to look for the platforms that the broader public use and somehow try to get attention. And of course, you can do that to some extent by having a spin on what you're doing that is understandable to the general public, which is not always easy. Another one which I find is quite useful for getting academic content out to a slightly wider audience is the conversation, because it aims to have a more journalistic style, but still wants to have an academic basis for the content, and their work is quite often repeated by other media because it's published in open mode. So just a few random thoughts.
Thanks very much. I wonder if any of the other panelists would like to make a last comment. Klaus, from President.
Thank you, Ronel and colleagues. Yeah, I think there were some good questions, and I think the issue of time and resources is something to consider. I'm also just mindful that it takes time to build up an audience, and it has huge advantage if it's linked to your personal profile. So in terms of your own presence on these platforms. I think as Philip has said there, like you said, there's ResearchGate and other more science-based social media platforms, if you want to call it like that, which also but I think that what it speaks to is also about the community aspect, that creating almost like a buzz in a certain community. I mean, and I think often there are certain pockets of conversations within the community, and I think it's about maybe finding a way to amplify that, and almost having that certain pockets in mind when you come up with your strategy, to think about what platform and which hashtag should I consider, and maybe who should I tag. Because I found sometimes I've tagged maybe like the official account from a whatever body or structure, but it is not as in a way golden as maybe tagging someone of influence who has a large following. And I think that large following that ideally it should be built up with organically, but I know people are using funding to amplify it as well. So that's another consideration, is whether to amplify some of the social media postings, and which you can do, especially if you have a certain campaign in mind, and not to spend too much money on that, and you can actually get away with only a couple of $100 and then have quite a broader reach. And some of the platforms actually allows you to almost like be more selective about the audience that you want to engage with. But it was just my own experience, and it's still learning. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Professor from Princeton. Are there any further questions, which I will make my last question, because I know we have a lunch break scheduled until 1. And I'm sure everybody's looking forward to a bit of a snack to eat. So if there's any question, we'll make it our last question. Thank you very much, colleagues. It seems as if there are no further questions. Thank you again to the panel for the really interesting presentations and the engagement with the audience. Thank you very much.